Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carroll County NAACP's annual Freedom Fund Banquet. This is our 18th year of having this banquet, and what we can say is that each year it gets better and better. However, today is October 11th. We usually have it on the third Friday, and this year we're having it on the second Friday. And I can tell you it's been a challenge. However, we're gonna get it through. And this year's theme is that we're gonna recognize our veterans that served during the Vietnam War era. It's something that we should be doing every day. Our past and present veterans that serve, that continue to make this nation free. However, we know that the nation itself is not free. Freedom doesn't come easy. And it's a continuous fight that we continue to try and make things free for everyone. As our soldiers serve across the country, abroad, and we have to keep them in our prayers. So I'm gonna turn it over now to our Master of Ceremonies this evening. I'm sure many of you all recognize who he is. I don't think he needs a great introduction because he's served in so many titles here in the county. His name is Mr. Charles Harrison, who himself is a veteran and served this nation with dignity and honor. Mr. Charles Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. And I too would like to welcome you all to the annual Freedom Fund Banquet. I will be serving as your Master of Ceremonies this evening. But before we begin, you will notice that there's some vacant spaces on the dais this evening. Those vacant spaces are due to the absence of Mr. John Lewis and Jean Lewis. While on a trip to West Virginia, John had residual effects of his medical condition, and they are in the hospital in West Virginia, so they won't be able to join us. So relaying Jean's message, we encourage you to enjoy the evening. We encourage you to keep John and Jean in your prayers for this evening, and continue to pray for his speedy recovery and return to Carroll County.
Heavenly Spirit, we lift into your loving arms John and Jean Lewis and pray for your healing graces. Heavenly Spirit, you are the only one with whom all secrets we share. Let us continue to pray for my fellow brothers and sisters who served in Vietnam. Grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change. Grant us the patience with the things that take time. Grant us tolerance for our struggles and the struggles of others, willingness to get up and try again, one day at a time. Because we believe that God is the creator of all people, and we are all God's children in one family, we understand that we work towards a world in which each person's value is respected and nurtured. Let those of us in this room who benefit from a privilege given to us due to our gender, our class, our color, our cultural background, or our faith, accept those privileges of such power and seize our responsibilities. Join us as we put on the whole armor of God. Keep our community safe. We lift up all our brothers and sisters who work for justice in our community. We lift up into your loving arms all our brothers and sisters who are responders in law enforcement, emergency medical services, and the fire service. We give thanks to those who are serving our country in the military. Help us to remember that our blessings are great. Help us to embrace those blessings and watch for you. We thank you for the privilege and honor of serving our community and the many ways in which you reveal yourself to us. Bless this time, this food, and the hands that prepared it. Bless our time together for fellowship. Remember our fallen servants. Amen.
One of the things we are also doing here tonight is recognizing veterans, most particularly African American veterans of Carroll County. And to lead off this portion of our program, the Community Media Center is with us tonight, and they're going to show us a video that focuses on those veterans.
To honor our local African American veterans, the Community Media Center is pleased to share the following excerpts from the Carroll History Project's Veterans Oral History Collection.
My name is Ron Hollingsworth, and I was born in New Windsor. Lived most of my life grew up in Union Bridge. So I've been in this county most of my life, except for the time that I was spent in the military. After 22 years in the military, I finally came back here, and I've been back here ever since.
Okay.
So I'm a native-born Carroll County. I finally started listening to my mother. My mother used to tell me all the time, as long as I can remember, you are going to be the first member of this family, not only my 4 brothers and sisters, but her entire family. You're going to be the first member of this family to ever go to college. They're going to draft me as soon as I graduate anyway. So for me, it would probably be better off if I go in as a second lieutenant than to go in as a private.
Right.
So that's why I took advanced reserve officer training. So I spent a lot of nights in jail, but we finally got desegregated. And I remember my cadre saying, "You guys are going to have a problem, because if you keep this up, you're going to lose your commissions." Oh, they did ask that I was spending time in jail, and I said, "Well, yeah, as a student demonstrator." He said, "Oh, well, we think we can get them to overlook that. You're a student demonstrator. You have never ever been arrested for any other reasons?" I said, "No, other than student demonstrations. That's it." So they gave me a waiver for that.
Right.
Didn't bother me at all. When I graduated from Morgan, I graduated on the 1st of June. On the 13th of June, I was sitting at Fort Hood, Texas, as a brand new second lieutenant. Didn't know anything, but I got through those trying times. But I tell you, in the Army is a strange environment, because you got all these rules and regulations and all these policies, and everybody in all these different ranks and things. Right. And my company commander, he's the guy that's in charge of life, told me the first day I walked in, he said, I'm just meeting the guy. He said, I grew up in Louisiana, and I have never liked blacks, and I like black officers even less. So if you're going to be in this unit, I can tell you right now, your career is going to be ruined before you even get started. That's how I got greeted when I walked to my company. But fortunately, I had one saving grace. Didn't realize at the time. One saving grace. My first sergeant was a black, and he'd been in the Army something like about 25, 26 years. So when I came walking out of the company commander's office after he gave me that big spiel, I had my head down, trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do now. The first sergeant says, "Come here, son. Let me talk to you for a minute." He said, I know what the company commander told you. He said, "I see you got a ring on your finger. You must be married. I tell you what I want you to do. Get your wife, after you get settled, get your wife and come on by my house tonight. Or tomorrow night. If you're still getting settled, come by my house tomorrow night. I'll introduce your wife to my wife, and we'll sit down and talk. Can't talk to you in here." Well, he did. I went by his house, and next day, he said, "I've been in this man's army for 26 years, and this is the first time in 26 years I've had a black officer in my unit with me. So I'm going to square you away." I said, "Well, first I tell you what, if you can square me away, I don't know anything." He said, "If you'll listen to me, I'll get you squared away." I did 20 years.
20 years.
I retired. Retired as lieutenant colonel. But it was thanks to my first sergeant who squared me away when I first got in there. If it hadn't been for him, I probably would have suffered a lot, trying to learn the ropes and trying to understand how to deal with all this stuff. But he took care of me.
Yes, my name is Charles Edward Harrison.
And you currently live where?
I live at 5506 Crow's Nest Drive, Sykesville, Maryland.
And how long have you been a Carroll County resident?
Oh, I think I've been here since for 37 years.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And you were born and raised where?
Baltimore County, a place, a little black enclave called Turner Station, southeastern Baltimore County.
That was a traditional black enclave, wasn't it, for many, many years?
Yes, a viable place for employment was Bethlehem Steel Company.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Bethlehem Steel in its heyday was big, wasn't it?
Oh, geez, yes. Well, I was exposed to the military not in high school. I was a Boy Scout, Cub Scout, and came up through the ranks there. So I was inculcated into that spirit. When I was a student at Morgan State College, you were mandated at that time to take 2 years ROTC to obtain a deferment.
Right.
So I had 2 years. And I enjoyed those 2 years, so during my sophomore year, we had the option of joining the advanced ROTC. The benefits there is that they paid you $50 a month.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was a lot of funds for a struggling college student then.
Right. Were you in the ROTC program at Morgan when Richard Dixon was there?
Yes, I was. I was in the program. But I had the opportunity to take ROTC flight training while I was in that program, which was excellent. So flying and learning how to fly an aircraft became like a portion of the regular coursework. Yes, I was commissioned a second lieutenant and went to infantry officers basic course at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I tried to join the airborne ranger program there. But at that time, they needed pilots, so they wouldn't allow potential pilots to take that program. So from Fort Benning, I went to Fort Walters, Texas, which is outside of Mineral Wells, Texas, and that was the primary phase of the rotary wing. But ironically, at that time, I was a fixed wing pilot. And the typical military, well, we've got enough fixed wing pilots, so you'll become a helicopter pilot. Well, after phase one, I went to Hunter Stewart Army Airfield for advanced training, and then I was sent to Vietnam. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to Vietnam. My first several days in country, I received fire. And I landed the helicopter and looked at the tail rotor, the tail boom area, and I saw this small puncture going in, and I saw this hole coming out the other side. That was when I made up my mind, if I'm going to get shot at, I need to shoot back. So I made the transition into armed helicopters, which was the old B model helicopters. Oh, every day we got up to fly, and I was the aircraft commander. And commander of what was called Cougar Team. I flew for the 57th Assault Helicopter Company, and they were the folks transporting the troops for combat assaults, and we provided the gun cover for them. We supported medevac missions. We would participate in what was called hunter-killer teams. And that's where we would go into enemy-infested areas and try to locate and destroy the enemy. We did lose several pilots during my stay in Vietnam. So after retiring from the FBI, I attempted to become more and more involved in the community here and what's going on in Carroll County here.
Well, Charles, we certainly thank you for your magnificent contributions in the ROTC, in Vietnam as an active duty military participant, and certainly as a resident of Carroll County, and all that you and your wife and your family have brought to Carroll County. You're a great example of a veteran and what a veteran can contribute to our county. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Skip. I appreciate the opportunity.
I was drafted in April of '69. I remember going on the bus or the induction at the induction center and going to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and getting off the bus, being hollered at the first thing, and but it was an experience. Actually, I volunteered to go to Vietnam. It was it's kind of like it's not really easy to talk about, but a lot of my friends were coming down on the levees, and at the time I had a kind of a cushion job, and I had to 1049, which is a form that you have to fill out. It took a couple of them because I found out that the first sergeant was throwing them in the trash can. He didn't want me to leave, so I hand carried the last one and got them all signed so I can get out of there.
You went straight to the man?
Yeah, I went straight to the man.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's very commendable.
Well, it's just I felt as though I wasn't no better than any of the other guys that were being sent there. When I first got there, you went into Cam Ranh Bay and went through the training, the Vietnamese training, and then I was assigned to headquarters company 26th Battalion Combat Engineers up in Chu Lai.
I know that's a very hard job to do. I know you made a lot of friends. Any casualties out of that branch?
A lot of casualties.
Out of that
Every
company?
time they went out, someone got hit. If you didn't see that person, most likely he was killed or got hit. So there was a lot of patrols going out and a lot of digging, a lot of bridges, a lot of this, a lot of that. So.
Did you develop good comradeship with the folks at the Combat Engineer Company?
As I said earlier, there was a lot of racial diversion at that particular time, and either you stayed with your group or you just didn't go out of your context, basically.
Understood.
The brothers hung with the brothers and the Puerto Ricans, and
The segregation.
The segregation was, but it was all. It wasn't to the point that we didn't associate with them. It's just we felt that the closeness to keep ourselves together. In Vietnam, you hear so many stories about the Vietnamese and their propaganda. And they would always be telling that stories that, why the brothers are fighting for the white man and this and that. And so, then you had the tensions back in the States on the protests
Yes.
and everything. And that made you feel a lot more uncomfortable.
Very difficult times.
It was,
back
it
then.
was. It's just a picture of some of the brothers that I was stationed with. And you can see that we do the para thing, and it was just having the closeness with your peers, you guys that you have to
Definitely.
live with, basically, and take care of. So, and not to talk about the racial division, but we had some guys there that were really down to earth, I guess you could say. I guess you could say this is one of the days that we were goofing off. They actually honored me with these flowers and recognition for my Vietnam service. So I really appreciate Winners Mill for doing that.
And you earned it.
Well,
You definitely did.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You can watch more local interviews at carroll.history.org. And be sure to tune in to HD 1086 on November 11th for a special all-day Veterans Salute. If you or someone you know would like to share their story of service, contact the Community Media Center at 410-386-4415.
A special thanks to the Carroll County Community Media Center. Listen, could I have the Vietnam veterans that are with us this evening please stand? Walter Grooms, Lieutenant Colonel Ron Collins, and myself. We are the remainders on life's list. People tend to rise to the top We have passed the era of the Korean veterans, and now those of us who participate in the Vietnamese era, we're rising to that top. So give us our just due while we're still here. In your brochure, you'll see a listing of all of the Carroll County veterans that participated and died in that Vietnam era conflict. So thank you all. Those current veterans, please continue to stand so we can recognize you all. We've got Dave Watkins, comrade in arms, and I think fellow helicopter pilot, correct?
No, not a help.
No. But Vietnam era, no.
No.
Right. Any other veterans that we have?
Joe Sherwood Gambrel.
Mr. Gambrel,
Yes.
thank you, sir, for your service. Thank you, sir, for your, we appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Colonel Thunder, yeah. Special Forces.
Terrific, sir. Special forces. Very good. Very good. It takes a special breed to participate, survive, and then return home with the mental stability to set aside those experiences. So many of our brothers in arms returned home and they were incapable or not able to adjust and become inculcated in our community the way they ought to be. So we appreciate the services that you as citizens of Carroll County are providing to our veteran community here in Carroll County. So now, Pam?
If you all haven't spent any time on the Community Media Center's Carroll County history page, Carroll County and the Black Experience, I really encourage you to do so. What you'll find there is such a rich treasure trove of an important part of Carroll County life and Carroll County history and a lot of what made us who we are today. So please check that out. And if you'd like to be interviewed, let them know. Now we're going to move to this evening's speaker. And we're very excited to have Mr. Gerald Stansbury with us, who, as Charles said earlier, is the president of the state Carroll, not the state Carroll County, the state of Maryland NAACP. And he has been for quite some time. He's been president of the Maryland State Conference since 2007. So I think I'm counting, that's 12 years at this point. And before that, for another 12 years, he was president of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. So he has a long history of working with the NAACP. He has so many board memberships, it's hard to list them all. He's a board member of the National Boy Scouts of America, Baltimore Council, of the DREAM Act of Maryland. He's on the board for Maryland Against Gun Violence, for Maryland Prevents Gun Violence Education Fund, Inc. He's on the Maryland State Police Superintendent's Diversity Committee, the Anne Arundel County Superintendent's Task Force on Student Discipline, the Maryland Attorney General's Task Force on the Use of Tasers. He is an advisory board member of Hunger Solutions, a member of Governor Hogan's Commission on the Use of Police Body Cameras, a member of the Governor's Justice Reinvestment Advisory Board, and a board member for Baltimore Neighborhoods. Do you sleep at all? I thought I was on a lot of boards, but this is, and he has been honored with so many awards. The Kelly Alexander 2013 National State President of the Year Award, the Medgar Evers 2013 Regional Freedom Fighter Medal, only one of 7 in the country, the Dr. Martin Luther King 2013 Man of Courage Award, the recipient of the National NAACP Fellheimer Award for state conferences, the Chairman's Award for 2018 for membership, Sojourner Douglas 2012 Alumni of the Decade Award, the AACO NAACP 2011 Humanitarian Award, Boy Scouts of America Silver Beaver Award, the Women of Color 2002 Men of Courage Social Action Award. I like that one. Respect 2002 Civic Leadership Reward, the Department of Human Services 2001 Employee of the Year Award, the Martin Luther King Drum Major Award, Maryland State Conference President of the Year Award, and there are so many more. I first got to know Gerald when I started becoming very active in this branch of the NAACP, and I know that he has always come through for Carroll County. Whenever one of our presidents, whether it's Jean Lewis or John Lewis or Charles Harrison, asked for help from the state, Gerald was always there to help, to give advice, to help us become what we are now, which is truly, and you know, okay, I'm a little biased, but we're one of the best branches in the state, right, folks? Woo! We have increased our membership over the years, which reminds me, if there's anybody out there that isn't a member, we're more than happy to take your name and get that information to you. I speak as the membership chair, so I'll be the one standing at the door not letting you out unless we have a chat. But we are really grateful for Gerald's leadership, and if it weren't for Mr. Stansberry, we wouldn't be where we are. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say to us tonight.
Okay, everybody up? That was a nice meal, wasn't it? Yeah. Come on, y'all, give it up. I like to hear. I like to watch some people out there. Let's give it up. Come on, stand up and shake it off a little bit. I know how that food was really good. Here, stand up and shake it up. Come on, get it up a little bit. Come on, loosen up a little bit, folks. Come on. Stand up. Y'all know what, come on. Y'all don't even want to stand up. Let's go. Come on, shake it off. I know how it is. Believe me, I got to drive all the way to Annapolis, so I'm not going to keep you long. All right, that's good enough. That's good enough. All right. That's good enough, but I'm going to leave you with something tonight. I want to let you know right off the bat, I'm not here to offend anybody or point my finger at any one person, but I know when I sit in the church, sometimes the preacher gets up and starts to talking, and I say, well, who been over here talking to that preacher about me? Because I think everything he says applies to me. So some things I'm going to say here tonight might apply to some of you in here, but I know it don't apply to these two up here because I had a long talk with them, and I know what they've been doing for the community. So let's give them a round of applause. I really appreciate what I heard. Again, I'm honored. I understand Jean, and I talked to her on the phone last night, and again, keep her in your prayers, and her and her husband. She's done a lot. Jean Lewis, small lady, but she carries a big stick. I'm telling you, that woman, she don't let go. You know what I mean? And she is, as you said, one of the best branches when it comes to doing the work. So I expect again, appreciate the veterans. I'm a veteran too, but I hadn't experienced what you guys experienced. I came just as the Vietnam War was over. A couple times I was on the bus and the plane waiting to go on alert, but fortunately I wasn't able to, we ended up not having to go on alert, but I really respect what you guys went through. And ladies went through, okay? And again, we can't thank you enough for your services. Tonight I'd like to talk to you using one of the speeches from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a foundation of my remarks. I personally like to remind my audience when I speak of Reverend King of his spiritual connection he possessed to his speeches. That Reverend King stated that before he was a civil rights leader, he was a preacher of the gospel. He said that it was his first calling and it remained his greatest commitment. He said all he had did in civil rights He did because he considered it a part of his ministry. Reverend King said that any religion that professes to be concerned about the souls of men is not concerned about the slums that cripple the souls, the economic conditions that stagnate the soul, and the city governments that may damn the soul is a dry, dead, do-nothing religion in need of new blood. And so I come to you this evening to reiterate some of the great words and insights of Reverend King, taken from a speech that he preached on August the 27th, 1967, titled, Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool. Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool. Many of you are familiar with Reverend King. I Had a Dream speech, and another of my favorites, the Drum Major Instinct. But the speech, Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool, I find so familiar with what is going on today. At the time he made the speech, we were involved in difficult struggle, and we still are today. At the time he made the speech, 104 years had passed since Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing, as we were referred to then, the Negro from bondage of physical slavery. And yet we stand here in 29, and 50 years later of the death of Reverend King, in a time when young, unarmed African Americans are being shot down in the streets, with no justice for victims or their families. We still, in 2019, 50 years later, after the death of Reverend King, face the tragic fact that the vast majority of African Americans in our country find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In 2019, and 50 years plus years after the death of Reverend King, the jails are still filled with over 71% of African Americans. African Americans are incarcerated in record numbers, and in some cases for committing the same crimes as whites who serve little to no time at all. African American families of our country are still forced to live in substandard housing conditions. Most of them, Reverend King said, do not have wall-to-wall carpets. Many of them are forced to live with wall-to-wall rats and roaches and in tents. Over 400 years later, since the slavery, and 50 years later, we still find ourselves in a situation where even though we live in a nation founded on the principles that all men are created equal, men are still arguing over whether the color of a man's skin determines the content of his character. African Americans still are subject to injustice in terms of income, wealth, unemployment, earnings, the risk of incarceration, and many measures of health. Over 400 years have passed, and 55 years plus of the death of the Reverend Martin Luther King, providing health care has come under attack. And when speaking of wealth and unemployment, some reports show that compared to whites, black Americans face the same risk of unemployment today as they did in the 1960s. Between 2007 and 2013, the net wealth of the median black household fell from 10% to 8% of median white households' wealth, largely the result of differential impact of the Great Recession. In other words, the median white household now has a net wealth 13 times greater than the median black household. In 2000, the median black household has an income that was 66% of the median white household income. In 2015, the figure was 59%. According to the Federal Reserve Board of Consumer Finance Survey, in 2017, white families had a median net worth of $171,000 compared with $17,000 for African Americans and $20,720 for Hispanics. According to the article reported by the Washington Post, the median net worth of whites remained 10 times the size of blacks. Hispanics or Latinos and nearly 1 in 5 black families have zero or negative net worth, twice the rate of white families. Speaking to incarceration and looking at the average state's rates of incarceration, we see that overall blacks are incarcerated at a rate of 5.1 times that of whites. And looking nationally, Hispanics are held in state prisons at an average rate of 378 per 100,000, producing a disparity of 1.4.1 compared to whites. Nearly 3/4 of federal inmates, 71.4%, are either of African American or Latino descent. That's 37.6 and 33.8 respectively. The problem with this is these two groups collectively only make up 21.3% of the entire population. Native Americans represent 2% of this incarcerated population and only 1.1% of the population. Asians, however, make up 1.5% of the federal prison population and 4.8% of the national population. This pattern is seen with white Americans as well. They make up 25% of the federal prison population, but are 63.7% of the U.S. population. Even the sentencing difference among African Americans, Latino, and whites are striking, with African American men sentenced to terms that are 20 to 50 times longer than white men for the same crime. Now this tells us that we still have a lot of work to do. So let me go into the parable that Reverend King brought forth. During the speech in 1967, Reverend King shared a dramatic story from the gospel recorded by St. Luke. It is the story of a man who by all standards of measurement would be considered a highly successful man. And yet Jesus called him a fool. If you will read that parable, you will discover that the central character in the drama is a certain rich man. Reverend King said that the man was so rich that his farm yielded tremendous crops. In fact, he had so much abundance of crops he didn't know what to do with them. But it occurred to him one day that he would have an alternative. And that was to build some new barns and bigger barns. And then he said once those barns were built, he was going to store his goods and his fruit there. And then he was going to say, my soul that has much goods laid up for many years, I have much goods laid up for many years. I'm going to take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry. That brother thought he was on top of the world and about to live the life of Raleigh. But the parable didn't end there with the statements that he was making. It ends by saying that God, a higher authority, said to him, thou fool, not next year, not next week, not tomorrow, but this night, my soul is required, thy soul is required of thee. And so it was at the height of his prosperity, he died. Look at the parable. Think about it. Think of this man and what is going on in the world today and how you and individuals are living today. If that man lived in today's time, he would be considered a big shot. And he would be abound with all of the social prestige and all of the community influence that could be afforded. Most people would look up to him because he would have something they call money. And yet a Galilean peasant had the audacity to call that man a fool. King said that he was not called a fool because he made his money in a dishonest fashion. There is nothing in the parable to indicate that this man was dishonest and that he made his money through conniving and exploitative methods. In fact, it seems to reveal that he had a medium of humanity and that he was a very industrious man. He was a thrifty man, apparently a pretty hard worker. So he was not called a fool because he got his money through dishonest means. And there is nothing here to indicate that he was called a fool because he was rich. I like when you look at this parable because with me and try to decipher the real reason that this man was called a fool. Number one, He was called a fool because he allowed the means of which he lived outdistance the ends of which he lived. The way Reverend King explained it, this he said, each of us live in two realms, the within and the without. The within of our lives, he describes as the realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, religion, and morality. The without of our lives describes as the complex of devices, of mechanisms, instrumentalities, by means of which we live. The house we live in, that's a part of the means by which we live. The car we drive, the clothes we wear, the money that we are able to accumulate, in short, the physical stuff that's necessary for us to exist. King said that we must always keep a line, a boundary between the two. That man was a fool, according to King, because he didn't do that. The example given by Reverend King was a man in Atlanta. He said the man's wife had an automobile accident. The man received a call that the accident had taken place on the expressway. The first question the man asked when he received the call, how much damage did she do to my Cadillac? He never asked his wife how his wife was doing. The man allowed an automobile become more significant than the person, his own wife. In the words of Reverend King, he wasn't a fool because he had a Cadillac. He was a fool because he worshiped his Cadillac. He allowed his automobile to become more important than his wife. And so in King's analogy, the rich man was a fool because he allowed the means by which he lived outdistance the ends for which he lived. He was a fool because he maximized what should have been minimized and minimized the maximum. This man was a fool because he allowed his technology to outdistance his theology. This man was a fool because he allowed his mentality to outrun his morality. Somehow became so involved in the means by which he lived that he couldn't deal with the way to external matters. He didn't make contributions to civil rights. He looked at suffering humanity and wasn't concerned about it. He may have had great books in his library, but he never read them. He may have had out recordings of great music of the ages, but he never listened to it. He probably gave his wife mink coats of convertible automobile, but he didn't give her what she needed most, which was love and affection. He probably provided bread for his children, but he didn't give them any attention. He didn't really love them. Somehow he looked up the beauty of the stars, but he wasn't moved by them. He had heard the glad tidings of philosophy and poetry, but he really didn't read it to comprehend it or want to comprehend it. And so this man justly deserved his title. He was an eternal fool. He allowed the means by which he lived outdistance the ends for which he lived. Then number two, this man was a fool because he failed to realize his independence on others. Now, as you read the parable in the book of Luke, you will discover that this man utters about 60 words. And do you know in 60 words, he said, I and my more than 15 times. This man was a fool because he said I and my so much until he lost the capacity to say we and our. He failed to realize that he couldn't do anything by himself. This man talks like he could build the barns by himself, like he could till the soil by himself, and he failed to realize that wealth is always a result of the commonwealth. Maybe you haven't ever thought about it, but get this, y'all. Listen to this real close. When you get up in the morning, without being dependent on most of the world, you are most dependent on most of the world. Where King broke this down, he said, you get up in the morning and you go to the bathroom and you reach over for a sponge. And that sponge is given to you by a Pacific Islander. You reach over for a towel, and that towel is given to you by a Turk. You reach down to pick up your soap, and that is given to you by a Frenchman. Then after dressing, you rush to the kitchen and you decide that this morning that you want to drink a little coffee. That's poured in your cup by a South American. Or maybe this morning you prefer tea. That's poured in your cup by a Chinese. Or maybe you want some cocoa, and that's in the morning, this morning, and that's poured in your cup by a West African. Then you reach over to get your toast. And then that's given to you by the hands of an English-speaking farmer. Not to mention the baker. Before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you are dependent on more than half of the world. And oh, my friends, I don't want you to forget, no matter where you are today, somebody helped you to get there. It may have been an ordinary person doing an ordinary job in an extraordinary way. Some of us here today were able to get some education. We did not get it by ourselves. Let's not forget, somebody helped us. It's time to reciprocate. In the larger sense, we've got to see this in our world today. Our white brothers must see this. Many of them haven't seen it up to now. The great problem facing our nation today in the area of race is that it is the black man who, large extent, produce wealth for this nation. And the nation doesn't have sense enough to share its wealth and its power with the very people that made it so. The black man made America wealthy. Reverend King reminded his audience that African Americans had been here and that he was not going anywhere. Still today, 150 years later, some people talk about separate state and that African Americans should go back to Africa. He told of how he loved Africa and it was his ancestral home. Reverend King said his grandfather and his great-grandfather did too much to build this nation for him to talking about getting away from it. Reverend King in history tells us before the Pilgrim Fathers landed on Plymouth Rock in 1620, African Americans were here. He said before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, African Americans were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king. With their hands and with their backs and with their labor, they built sturdy docks, the stout factories, the impressive mansions of the South. Now back to the parable that rich man said he had so many goods, he didn't know what to do with them. Reverend King said he wished he was there at the time. Because he would have told that man there were hungry stomachs that needed to be filled. There were empty pockets that needed to have access to money. Well, it's 150 years later. America today is also rich in goods. America has plenty of big bonds. And every day our rich nation is building new bonds and larger bonds and greater bonds. Reverend King talked about how we spend millions of dollars a day to store surplus food. And to America, and he said to America, I know where you can store that food free of charge. In the wrinkled stomachs of millions of God's children in Asia, Africa, South America, and our own nation, where many of our citizens go to bed hungry every night. Finally, this man was a fool because he failed to realize his dependence on God. Do you know that man talked like he regulated the seasons? That man talked like he gave the rain to grapple with the fertile of the soil. That man talked that he provided the dew. He was a fool because he ended up acting like he was the creator rather than a creature. Now from the parable, I shook my head in despair because today the world is full of so many that we can call fools today. They are rich, but never fed a person who was hungry. Rich, but never visited a sick person that they didn't know. Never clothed a person that was naked or offered shelter to one that was homeless. Nor have they donated a penny toward human civil rights or civil rights. So in honor of Reverend King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we revere and celebrate. I'm asking each of you not to fall into the characteristics of that man Jesus called a fool, and not to let your means by which you live outdistance the ends for which you live. Live by the within and not that which falls without. Take up the mantle when you have the opportunity. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick, stand up, speak up, be an advocate for human rights and civil rights. Let not your silence of your voice be a cosign to those that constantly put the Voter Rights Act of 1965 on attack. Let not the silence of your voice cosign that we are not in more need of gun control or to eradicate assault weapons, health care. Let not the silence of your voice give hate a place to dwell. Instead, make your voice heard. Let everyone know that you believe in loving thy neighbor as thyself. You believe doing unto others as you expect them to do unto you. That all men and women are created equal. That injustice anywhere means injustice everywhere. And that all men and women, children, black, white, red, brown, or yellow, must be judged by the content of their heart and not the color of their skin. Thank you so much.